A massive corruption scandal in Ukraine could end Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's political career. And in the backdrop, you have President Donald Trump and his administration absolutely eager to get a peace deal signed between Russia and Ukraine. But again, Zelensky could be even more unpopular if he signs on to this peace deal. In addition to the fact that he is caught up in this crazy corruption scandal. Cenk, your 2 cents?
Yeah, so I read the whole 480-part peace plan. There's 2 problems with it. Other than that, kind of cross fingers that it passes. So yeah, I'm curious what you think about it.
I think one of the rare instances in which Trump is correct is that Ukraine doesn't have the card. We don't have the cards. No one has the cards other than Russia. Russia is winning the war. So like, why are we pretending as though like all we need to do is wag our fingers and be like, you stop it right now, Vladimir Putin, and he'll stop.
Yeah, I want to get into that conversation a little bit more after you tell everybody the facts. Sure. But also, we have kind of an Israel-Palestine situation here because like the Palestinians might regret, for example, not taking the 2008 deal. And I don't want that to happen to the Ukrainians. So on the other hand, an invading country doesn't really get to have any moral standing. So it's complicated. Let's give you the facts and then don't worry, at the end, we'll solve it.
So we'll get to that corruption scandal that I referenced in just a bit. But first, let's get to the basics, and they are really just the basics of this proposed peace deal. So it was reportedly drafted by Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, who apparently and allegedly consulted with both Russian and Ukrainian officials. Also included in drafting this proposal was Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner and Secretary of State Marco Rubio, really the who's who of real winners when it comes to diplomacy. Now the plan has 28 parts and is honestly too long for us to get into the nitty-gritty and minor details of, but I'm just gonna do a quick summary of what you need to know about this proposal. So in this proposal, Ukraine's sovereignty would be confirmed. Ukraine would get security guarantees, which is something that they desperately want from both the United States and NATO. If Russia attacks Ukraine again, it will face a decisive military response from the United States and NATO. Okay, that's the security guarantee that's baked into this proposal. I think that's pretty damn good, honestly.
Yeah, so it's a tiny bit vague on purpose. It says that response will come from the transatlantic community, okay? So now the whole point of going to NATO is to have a security guarantee. So if they get an actual security guarantee without going into NATO, it kind of gets the job done on both sides because Russia wants to be able to tell its home audience, see, we prevented them from getting into NATO. And the Ukrainians want to be able to say, see, we got a security guarantee from America and Europe.
Yeah.
So that part I like, that's a good way of resolving a tough issue.
I agree, and in fact, Ukraine, this is what Russia really wants. Now, Ukraine wants the security guarantee in case Russia thinks about invading again, right? So this deal would give them that security guarantee. However, it also gives Russia what it wants in that Ukraine would be permanently banned from joining NATO.
Yeah.
So I think that's a good middle ground because you get the security guarantee of NATO without joining NATO.
Yeah, and I don't care if Ukraine's banned permanently. And by the way, newsflash, nothing's permanent. They could change it 12 years from now, 18 years from now.
That's very true,
right?
Yes.
And so, it's in the charter. So what? You change the charter, right?
That's true. Although that would be a provocative move.
Yeah, I don't want it.
And you shouldn't do it because it'll probably lead to more war.
Yeah, I don't want it, but I just want to say it's not a provision that's too onerous, in my opinion, for us or the Ukrainians. There are 2 other parts of the peace plan that I don't love. But also remember that Ukrainians would also be in talks to go into the European Union and would immediately get the same status as if they're in the European Union. So they get the economic benefit of joining Europe without the technical NATO part of it, the military part of it. But again, they're getting the security guarantee. So that part is pretty good for Ukraine, if you ask me.
Yeah, look, Russia doesn't have to worry about NATO military exercises on its border. Right? It doesn't have to worry about that if this is the deal that ultimately gets signed. Here's some more details though. There would be a global effort to help rebuild Ukraine. As you can imagine, it's been just devastated by this ongoing multi-year war. And the United States in particular would help with rebuilding Ukraine's gas infrastructure. Now sanctions will very gradually be lifted from Russia. Those economic sanctions didn't destroy Russia's economy as the United States had hoped, especially because Russia is aligned with the BRICS countries and was able to kind of skirt some of the damaging impact of those economic sanctions. But nonetheless, as part of this deal, the sanctions that the US and Europe have imposed against Russia would gradually be lifted. Now, Russia will state in law that it will not attack Ukraine or Europe, and Ukraine will permanently forfeit nuclear weapons, something that they actually did in the 90s, and I think that was a big mistake. They did it at the behest of the United States. Ukraine will hold elections in 100 days. So that's been another sticking point for those who have been critical of Ukraine. Although we all know that the lawmakers in Ukraine have passed laws ensuring that during wartime they will not be holding elections, an increasing number of Ukrainians are getting frustrated with the fact that this ongoing war has prevented them from engaging in a democratic process, especially if they're not happy with the way Volodymyr Zelensky has handled this ongoing war. Now, then there's the most contentious issue of all, and that's territory, of course. So let's take a look at this map. This is a graphic of Ukraine, or this graphic is a map of Ukraine from The Guardian. And the light red areas are controlled by Russia. The dark red areas have recently been taken over by Russia. So those tiny little red spots that you see, right alongside the light red, those are like the newly obtained regions or areas that Russia was able to take control of. Now, Kherson and Zaporizhzhia will be frozen at the line of contact, aka where troops are currently stationed under this peace deal, and Russia will forfeit the rest of the disputed territory it has captured. Likewise, Ukraine will forfeit the Russian territory they've captured, which will become a demilitarized zone.
But technically Russia. You know what TYT's always been about? Taking on the corrupt, greedy establishment. For us, it's the corporate media. We've been fighting that fight for over 20 years. For the cell phone industry, it's the same story. A handful of massive corporations ripping you off. That's why we're partnering with Noble Mobile. They're the only wireless company with the same mission as ours, to fight back. Their No Bull plan offers unlimited data for just $50 a month. But here's the best part. For any data you don't use, you get cash back. Real money you can spend however you want. Stop letting your unused data pad the pockets of billionaires. With Noble, you take control over your data. And by switching to Noble, you're directly supporting TYT in our mission of bringing you honest, independent news. So give Noble a try and make the switch today. Scan the QR code on the screen now or visit go.tyt.com/plan. That's go.tyt.com/plan.
And then the territories of Crimea, Luhansk, and Donetsk will now belong to Russia. So that is definitely the more provocative element of this peace deal. But going back to the argument that I made earlier, Cenk, if Ukraine and Russia don't agree to this peace deal, let's say Russia does, right? And I don't necessarily trust Russia because there have been other instances, previous instances, where they pretend like they're gonna accept the peace deal and then they pull the rug out from underneath Trump. So I would proceed with caution in trusting Russia when they say that they're warm to this peace deal. At the same time, let's say we're in a scenario in which Russia does accept it and Ukraine says no. Well, who are you to say no? You're losing the war.
Well, so here's where it gets super complicated, right? So one of our members, Boomer Dragon Cat, wrote in on TYT.com, Russia's economy is in tatters, the troops aren't even getting paid. A strong US would rip the rug right out from under Putin. So Cat and Anna, guys, I've now read so many things on both sides. I read the Russians are on the brink of economic collapse, to Russians are perfectly fine economically, and because of BRICS, etc., they've recovered, right? So, and I've heard, the Russians are in retreat, the Russians are on the march. So it's so hard to know what's propaganda and what's real news and what the current situation is. I'm not sure our government really knows, let alone the American public and us. Now, obviously the most telling part is who is gaining territory and who isn't. And right now, the Russians appear to be gaining more territory. The Ukrainians do have some areas that they took, right? But it looks like the Russians have regained the upper hand. So which leads me to some of my issues here, which is Yeah, you don't like the moral responsibility is on Russia completely, but unfortunately, with the way that the world is shaping up now, we now have a new world order. The old one that George H.W. Bush tried to put into place when Iraq invaded Kuwait was, you are not allowed to invade any sovereign country that didn't attack you, right? I like that a lot. But now the new world order is, if you're a larger country, especially if you have nukes and the other country doesn't, you're basically allowed to do whatever you want and kill as many of their people and take as much of their land as you want. But if you're a smaller country, you're not allowed to do any of that, okay? So that's what Israel did to Gaza. That's what Russia's done to Ukraine, right? So that's just a reality. And I hate that these wars have now started where the bigger country just swallows a part of the other country and goes, that's it, I'm keeping it now. And if you don't agree to the deal, the people that I've just slaughtered, if you don't agree to that deal, I'm gonna make the deal worse. I'm gonna kill more of you and take more of your land. Now, of course, the difference is with Israel, we're being made to pay for those atrocities.
We're paying for this too.
We're paying for this.
We're paying for everything.
We're at least on the side of the good guys, the Ukrainians, who are trying to defend themselves against an aggressive colonial empire in the form of Russia.
I understand that. I understand the dynamics are totally different. We shouldn't give a single cent to Israel, period. But how long are we gonna continue funding Ukraine's failed defense?
Well, I don't know. I wouldn't necessarily
Jake,
call it a failed defense.
Here.
But Anna,
let's be real here. $38 trillion in debt. Ukraine is losing more and more territory. Have you guys seen the videos? Look, what changed my mind about this entirely was seeing like literal elderly civilians in Ukraine getting snatched from the middle of the street by the authorities in Ukraine because they're forced to fight this war. And they go to the front lines, they die. I mean, this has already destroyed Ukraine in so many different ways outside of losing territory.
Okay, but Anna,
their male population is getting wiped out.
But Anna, I totally agree with you, and that's why this is so hard. But the Ukrainians don't want to stop. The Ukrainians, it's not like we're doing the Ukrainians a favor by saying that's it, stop the war now and give all that territory to Russia. They're furious about it.
Of course they're furious about it.
I know, so it's not like we're necessarily helping the Ukrainians by forcing this deal on them. It's complicated. So for example, if China were to go into a number of countries, right? They decide, forget it, not only are we taking Taiwan, we're taking Vietnam and Malaysia, right? And we were told the Vietnamese, well, you're on a losing end of this war, the Malaysians, right? Well, how long can we help your failed defense? Are we just supposed to let China take them all, right?
But Jake,
so that's why it's hard, it's not easy.
So how long is it gonna go on? How long is the American taxpayer gonna be responsible for funding Ukraine's fight against Russia?
So now that gets to my opinion on this deal.
Go ahead.
Okay, so by the way, it also has a lot of economic benefits for Russia. It says you get a lot of some of the money that we froze goes towards rebuilding, but some goes towards economic deals with US and Russia that ties together more, mineral rights, gas starts flowing again. So we get helped economically, Russia gets helped economically, Ukraine gets helped economically. So those are all good parts of the deal. Bad parts are giving up a ton of land. So 3 whole territories are gone, as Anna described, parts of 2 others, and some areas get demilitarized zone, but they're technically part of Russia, okay? So that's a ton of territory to give up. Second problem is it limits the size of the Ukrainian army. I don't think that's in anybody else's business how big Ukraine's army is.
Yeah, I agree with you on that.
Yeah, so those are 2 terrible parts of this peace resolution. Now, all of the things I said to Anna and you guys is in prelude to me saying, easy for me to say since I'm not a Ukrainian, but I think I would take the deal, okay? Number one, the deal might just get worse and worse the more you lose leverage in the military. I hate that that's true, but it is true. And look at what happened to the Palestinians. So look, a lot of those deals that the Israelis offered throughout the years were totally fake. They were meant to go, we offered you a deal. No, you didn't take it, that's it. We're back to occupying you, enslaving you, etc. right? But I think one of them was real, the 2008 deal by Ehud Olmert. And since then, the Palestinians have lost more land and gotten more people killed. So as painful as these peace deals are, especially for the victims of the invasion, at some point you're better off taking it than not taking it. And so at this point, it's not my place to say how much territory they should give up, but from an outside perspective, I would try really hard to get a little bit more land and to remove the provision on the Ukrainian army and then take the deal.
Now, when it comes to Zelensky, though, there is something that kind of complicates this matter, namely the fact that his political career and popularity could really suffer as a result of accepting this deal. At least that's what the corporate media in the US says. So there are a lot of Ukrainians who want this war to end as well. They've seen far too many of their male family members get slaughtered in this ongoing war. So keep that in mind. That doesn't get reported much here in the United States, unfortunately. But at the moment, Zelensky really has no safe harbor. Without a peace deal between Russia and Ukraine, Russia will continue pushing further and further into Ukrainian territory. That has been the pattern. That will continue to be the pattern. There's no reason to believe otherwise. But if Zelensky accepts the deal, his political career could be over, which honestly, if you ask me, that's the least of my concerns. But you have to think about it from the aspect of the major player here, Zelensky, who ultimately gets to decide whether or not to accept this peace deal. So knowing what his ulterior motives might be is important in understanding this ongoing conflict. So there are two main reasons why his popularity could suffer. For one, according to the Wall Street Journal, not their editorial board, this is actually their straight news reporting. They report that the Ukrainians are not interested in making concessions to Russia. They claim that there could be a full-on military uprising if Zelensky puts his weight behind this so-called unpopular deal. Again, this is the Wall Street Journal's reporting. They also report that they spoke to a military analyst who visits the Ukrainian front lines, and this individual stated that forfeiting the cities of Donbass could lead to a crisis in civil-military relations. And apparently US officials are aware of the problem. During the negotiations this weekend, the Ukrainian side made clear to US officials that they are willing to start discussions from the current contact line and do not want to engage with Russian offers to swap territory. The Americans expressed understanding that territorial questions could stir social unrest or military protests in Ukraine. And then you have Zelensky's issues with corruption within the country and within his own government. So the Ukrainian president is already unpopular in the country due to this massive corruption scandal. So it has to do with his former business partner who recently got busted for stealing $100 million from Ukraine's state nuclear energy company. Zelensky has also been accused of conspiring to protect his deputy head of state from a corruption investigation back in 2020. And then just this past summer, Ukrainians protested en masse when Zelensky stripped Ukraine's anti-corruption agency of its independence. In fact, the protests were so large and so rowdy that the public backlash led to Zelensky reversing his decision.
Yeah, Ukraine has to prepare for what's next, because if their leaders say take the deal, but there's some sort of military uprising and they basically don't take the deal, then they have to be prepared to move on without us. So that whether you think that's the right thing or the wrong thing, that for the purpose of this conversation doesn't matter. Because what's gonna happen in America is if we do a peace deal and they say yes, and then their military backs out, the appetite for further funding of Ukraine is going to be non-existent. So they have to be, if they're gonna make that decision, however they make it, then if they were being rational, they would say, all right, yes, but how do we do this? How do we conduct this war and win this war without America's help? And that's gonna be super hard.
Final thing I'll end on is the neocons absolutely hate this peace deal, loathe it. The war hawks absolutely loathe this potential peace deal getting signed. In fact, I'm gonna go to graphics 7 and 8 here, starting with Senator Mitch McConnell, who says, Putin has spent the entire year trying to play President Trump for a fool. If administration officials are more concerned with appeasing Putin than securing real peace, I mean, what would you know about real peace, McConnell, please? Then the president ought to find new advisors. Rewarding Russian butchery would be disastrous to America's interests. How so? Like, how so? How like, don't put this in, like, framing this as a threat to the United States is ridiculous. You want to frame this as a threat to Poland, for instance? Okay, we're having a conversation. But don't try to scare Americans into thinking, oh no, we should continue supporting a war effort in Ukraine. No, please. Let me just read the rest. He also says that rewarding Russian butchery would be disastrous to America's interests, and a capitulation like Biden's abandonment of Afghanistan would be catastrophic to a legacy of peace through strength.
Oh, come on.
And I'll give you one more. The vice president of George W. Bush's Presidential Center wrote the following: the 28-point plan should be dropped and replaced with a simple 1-point plan: Russia, get out of Ukraine. Wow, really hard to understand how Iraq turned out to be such a debacle.
Yeah, and if you don't know, the neocons are animated about this for a couple of reasons. One, they love war. That's not surprising. Two, they think that this is depleting Russia and helps us. Although it helps us how, they never defined. So, if Russia is depleted, then Americans get higher wages, lower drug prices? No, they never clarify that. And then the third factor, unfortunately, is since Russia is allied with Iran, Israel would love for that war to continue forever and ever and ever, and to have Russia greatly weakened and distracted so they can't protect their allies like Bashar al-Assad, a bad guy, but Russia was on his side. Russia was distracted by this war. Syria and Turkey decided, perfect, this is a great time to knock off
Israel and Turkey, you mean?
I'm sorry, Israel and Turkey, yes. Decided perfect time to knock off the Syrian government.
Yep.
And to bomb Iran because the Russians can't protect them.
That's exactly right.
So Israel wants us to keep going. The neocons want us to keep going. That's another good reason to not keep going. Every time you ring the bell below, an angel gets his wings. Totally not true, but it does keep you updated on our live shows.